The Honourable David Parker.
Mr Speaker, the New Zealand Herald said in respect of this national policy that it was the great brain robbery, stealing ideas off the Labour Party, but in reality a pale shadow of them. The credit for this policy in respect of children and in respect of paid parental leave should go to Jacinda Ardern and Sue Moroney. They're the ones that got this up on the political agenda, so much so that the National Party was scared and decided that they would implement a shadow of it. Mr Speaker, this bill, which has just been presented under urgency, and I haven't had time to read it in detail yet because it really has just been tabled minutes ago in the House, is the first piece of legislation considered under the budget. The budget where the government has had to fudge it in order to get back to budget surplus and fund this. The National Party don't like that truth, but it is. What are the most clear ones that we've found so far? Well, we know that they, compared with last year's budget, have got $560 million less as the Crown's share of Christchurch or Canterbury local infrastructure costs. It's gone down in terms of the government's budget by $560 million. A week after the Christchurch Council produced a report to say, from Kortamenta, an independent report to say that their share of those same costs were going up. So it's just not credible for the government to say that those costs are going down. Further than that, we've also uncovered a document which shows that the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, Jerry Brownlee, had a deal with the prior Chief Executive and Mayor of Canterbury, of the Christchurch City Council, that they wouldn't review the numbers until after this budget, until after the election. Really cynical, really cynical. The second one that we've uncovered is that we now know from the Judith Collins dodgy announcement in this budget reflecting her personal conduct as a minister that they've overtaken ACC levies by $120 million this year, which overstates the surplus this year by $120 million. So they say they're going to reverse that out next year, but they've kept it for this year, and they did the similar thing last year. And then the other area which is a bit dodgy is that they're putting $375 million into transport spending in Auckland in addition as a loan, robbing the future Land Transport Fund, funding it out of a notional interest-free loan, which if they really wanted to do it, they should have booked this year as additional capital expenditure this year rather than having this pretence at an interest-free loan. Mr Speaker, health spending has gone down in real terms. I've crunched the numbers with the help of some of our staff since this was read out. We know that using the Treasury's own model, the health spending is going backwards by 2.3% in real terms. It's going up in nominal terms from $14.4 to $14.7 billion. That's total Crown spending on health, or core spending. Using the Treasury's own model, taking into account both inflation and demographic changes, in real terms, according to the Treasury's own model, that's a 2.3% cut. 2.3% cut. So this budget surplus, yeah, it's real and it's good. You know, governments have to be prudent and get back to surplus, but it is a fiddle. They fudged it. They fudged it, Mr Speaker. Now, in respect of this particular measure, it's half a best start. Half a best start is how I would call it. The best start package from the Labour Party is better than this. In fact, there's no one person, I'm told by our spokesperson, I'm sure this is correct, there's no person would be better off under this package compared with the Labour's best start package. In other words, the best start package is better for everyone who's better off under this package. Mr Speaker, there are a couple of things that stand out as wrong with this package, and I shouldn't be surprised by this, and that is that the most vulnerable in New Zealand don't get anything out of this measure that we're passing today, despite the fact that those New Zealanders who are most vulnerable have faced increasing power prices, increasing rents. In some parts of Auckland, rents have gone up by 40%, despite those very real increases in their costs, which actually, for those people, their costs have gone up more than the cost of living. The cost of living is an average across the country, but their costs for these vulnerable New Zealanders have gone up by more than the cost of living, and yet this package does nothing for them. Despite the fact that we've got 285,000 children living below the poverty line, the really only significant policy in respect of child poverty in New Zealand in this budget this year, after all those rising housing costs, after those rising rents, after those rising electricity bills, after those increasing numbers of children living in poverty, the most vulnerable children in New Zealand don't get anything out of this bill. Not 1 cent, not $1, not this year, not the year after, not the year after that. They get nothing. So in a country where we've got rising inequality, the government denies it. We heard the Prime Minister misrepresenting those statistics, and again in the House today in his budget speech, he stood up and he said the Brian Perry measure of income inequality, which is the ratio of low incomes to high incomes, hasn't got worse according to him. Well, actually, it has got a bit worse under the government. Hasn't got as much worse as it had in earlier times, but it's still got worse. And he says that because of that we haven't got rising inequality. Well, that is just such a facile argument. It shames me that we have in New Zealand, this country that used to have low levels of child poverty, a Prime Minister that stands up and pretends that we have not got rising inequality in New Zealand. You know, New Zealand used to be in the best quarter of the OECD advanced nations in the world when it came to income inequality. We are now in the worst 40%. So we've moved from being in the best quarter in the world to the worst 40% at a time when the OECD as a whole has been getting worse. So there was a bad trend internationally, and New Zealand beat that bad trend by even being worse than the bad trend. And the only push against that trend of income inequality rising in New Zealand in recent decades, in a material sense, was the last Labour government through Working for Families, which, of course, the Prime Minister called communism by stealth at the time. Now, even that measure, which is a disgraceful increase in income inequality, undermeasures income inequality because it excludes capital gains and other irregular income which are concentrated amongst the wealthy. And that's absolutely clear from the data series. We've proven that in the House. We've actually even forced Bill English to admit it, but the Prime Minister pretends it's not the case. So income inequality as measured by the Brian Perry figures, which are credible, but they're only a subset of income, and therefore they undermeasure income inequality, and yet we know it's still getting worse. The next thing to say in respect of that is that when you have income inequality that is at the level in New Zealand, even if it doesn't get worse from year to year, overall inequality does get worse, because every year the consequences of that inequality stack up. And you see that so clearly in New Zealand. 75% of New Zealanders think that those gaps are widening in New Zealand under this government. They're absolutely right. And the statistics prove it. The number of children living in poverty, whatever you measure you use, it's going up. The number of people who own their own house is going down. It's the lowest it has been in 50 years. We shouldn't be surprised, because this government runs New Zealand in the interests of the wealthy, who do well out of those settings of rising inequality, because they get to own an even higher proportion of the assets in New Zealand, including a higher proportion of our houses. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill, we'll be supporting it. It makes things a little better than they were. It's only half of Best Start. It's a pale imitation of it. It doesn't improve the lot of the most vulnerable, and it doesn't deal with this terrible imbalance that we have in our economy, Mr. Speaker. That's all I've got time for at this first reading.
I call the honourable member David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it isn't the matter that it's all that Speaker had time for.